Hello, welcome. My name is Gurumurthy Kalyanram. I'm a doctoral alumnus of MIT. I welcome you on behalf of MIT South Asian Alumni Association, the MIT New York Sloan Alumni Club, and the MIT Energy and Sustainability Network. Leading our conversation this morning on this important and many will argue existentially urgent topic on climate and sustainability is Professor John Sterman, who is a distinguished professor at MIT and a thought leader in system dynamics and systems thinking. There's no other issue that is more eminently important in systems thinking than climate change. There are so many elements to this: policy, science, technology, common sense, public awareness. And John has done a lot of work and thinking in this area. We welcome John. Thank you. And over to you, John.
Great. Well, thank you, GK. Appreciate it. And I'm very glad to be here. Let me share my screen. And GK, you let me know if it's visible.
Yes.
Great. So here's what we're going to try to do in a very brief hour. I'm going to try to give you a little bit of orientation on what exciting work is going on the campus and at the Sloan School around climate change. There's some very exciting new initiatives. But most of the time we're going to spend using an interactive simulation tool that my group and I and our partners have developed called En-ROADS. And I'm going to have you all solve the climate crisis. So I'll facilitate, but we're going to get your suggestions about what actions and what policies can make a difference on climate. And in order for this to work, I need you to be actively participating. So we're not going to wait until the end for Q&A. I need you to put your comments and questions in the chat or the Q&A feature. Raise your hand and we'll unmute you and call on you. And, any of you who have had me in the classroom, you know that I call on people, cold call on people, and that might happen too. So you need to be challenging me, disagree with me, put me on the spot. That's the best way for this to go. So let me give you a little bit of quick background. As many of you will know, our new president, Sally Kornbluth, has made climate change her signature initiative. There are also important new initiatives just announced recently on AI in the life sciences, but she has made the climate project, as we're calling it, her signature initiative. And much of the groundwork for this has been laid in the work that we've done at the Sloan School going back to 2007, when I and a few other colleagues, including Rick Locke, who I'm delighted to say is rejoining MIT and the Sloan School as the new dean, we co-founded the MIT Sloan Sustainability Initiative way back in 2006 and 7. We then built what we call the Climate Pathways Project that we're going to talk about today. And most recently, our former dean, Dave Schmidtlein, endowed the brand new MIT Climate Policy Center with $25 million out of Sloan's general endowment. All these things were kind of proof of concept that there's both an appetite for and a desperate need for deeper MIT solutions on the climate crisis. And here's the Sustainability Initiative, Climate Pathways Project, and the Policy Center. So that's a little bit of the background. Feel free to ask me anything about this. There's a lot of information on the web. Sally asked me to be part of the committee to help design, recruit the leaders for, and stand up the climate project. But mostly what I want to do today is have you all solve the climate crisis. What I am not going to do is we're not going to give you a lecture about climate science. There's no doubt the climate is warming, that humans are the overwhelmingly dominant cause of that. And most of that impact is coming from burning fossil fuels, deforestation, and other greenhouse gases that we put into the atmosphere. There's no doubt that the threats from climate change and the impacts today are already harming people. And if we don't do something dramatic, will be nothing short of catastrophic for humanity. This is not in doubt. What is in doubt is what do we do to solve it? And actually, so let's have you start out. Drop it into the chat. Drop into the chat one idea that you think would make a really big contribution to solving the climate crisis. Technology, changes in governance, whatever it is. Just go ahead. I want to hear from you. Drop it into the chat. One thing that you think would make a really big difference. Not seeing anything yet. Are you all able to post in the chat? Ah, here we go.
Yeah,
Okay,
the chat is
starting
able.
to see some things. Great. Reducing consumption, government's getting on board and admitting the problem. Okay, what else? Technology or changes in governance, international cooperation, whatever. Getting the young people involved. Great. Carbon tax, nuclear power, carbon price, zero coal, political will, modular nuclear reactors, carbon pricing again, renewable energy, great, more carbon pricing, solar. Oh, they're coming fast and furious now, fabulous. Voting, okay, political action, taxing energy, scaling back individual lifestyles and overconsumption, great. They're coming even faster than I can read them. All right, this is great. And there's some really fantastic ideas here. And similarly, when I do this with political leaders, senior leaders in business investing and the nonprofit sector, you get an enormous diverse array of responses to this question of what we should do. For example, something like this. Some people, just as some of you did, said we just need more renewables and low zero carbon energy sources. Others say nuclear. Some say we just need to get nuclear fusion going or ban coal, as was suggested in the chat here. Energy efficiency. I don't have to read the list. You can see them here. And there's people out there saying carbon prices or no, let's just go with technological breakthroughs or more government regulations, or let's fix the market failures that we have and then rely on the wisdom and capability of the market to solve these problems. In other words, there's no agreement. And this is heavily contested, heavily influenced by lobbying from all kinds of companies, but especially the fossil fuel industry, who are working hard to delay action on the climate. So here's the thing. When you've got this kind of disagreement, no expert can sit down and show you what's going on, show you the science, and expect that anything is going to change. Research shows that showing people research does not work. So how can people learn for themselves? We know people learn best from experience and experiment, but we can't do experiments with the climate. We don't have a duplicate planet Earth as a control case and our actual planet Earth. And by the time we wait and see how bad it's going to get, it's already bad, but wait to see how much worse it's going to get, it'll be too late to take effective action. So when you have that kind of situation, whether it's designing a new product or a new aircraft or running a nuclear power plant, what we do is we use simulation. So that's what we've done here. We've developed an interactive simulation tool called En-ROADS, and that's what we're going to get into in just a minute. The key thing about it is it's rigorously grounded in the best available science, and we constantly update it as the science and economic circumstances change. And you can change the assumptions for yourself because there is uncertainty here, and it's completely free. So you, after today, you can access it, share it with the people in your organization, the people in your community, share it with your kids who love it. It's been used all around the world. Here's the most recent data of over 400,000 people in 173 countries who have participated in workshops with our simulation tool. This is an undercount because many people use it and participate in workshops that we don't know about. And over 18,000 leaders in governments around the world, in business and civil society, in education, and so forth. I think I've personally briefed well over 200 members of the Senate and Congress of the United States, members of the last administration, many governors of US states, mayors, city councils, and many of their counterparts in other nations, including people in India and other Southeast Asian, South Asian countries, as well as in Europe, the UK, Japan, and so forth. Here's just a couple of examples from around the world. Okay, so that's enough preamble. And now the question is, so let's try it out. Let's have you solve the problem. Now, this is a slide, but let me get out of PowerPoint. And now you're looking at the simulation running live in an ordinary browser. And a very quick orientation. You'll have a lot of questions here, but feel free to ask them. But what I would suggest is play with it yourself after this hour, and it's fully documented. You can explore every assumption, every equation if you're so inclined, and many MIT people, we hope, will actually want to do that. The other thing I'd say here is all models are imperfect. So I'm not interested in defending it as being the ultimate correct model, because no model is. I'm interested in your constructive suggestions about where you think it needs to be improved, enhanced, and so forth. Having said that, the model is available in 20 languages, which you can actually 21 now, which you can see here, including Arabic, Hindi, Hebrew, Chinese, Japanese, and most of the European languages. And you should feel free to try those in your communities. You can also change the assumptions. You can get the documentation, but let's just dive right in. So, and it's important for me to mention that we have developed this simulation tool here in my group, but especially in partnership with Climate Interactive. And Climate Interactive is a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank that was founded by one of my former students, Drew Jones, and is a vital partner for us in this work. Okay, so how does it work? Well, we have a global model. So that's one place where the model is imperfect right now. We're going to work at the global level. We do have a regional model, but there isn't time for us to do that today. So we're going to work at the global level. And there are assumptions here that determine what the scenario is going forward. So on this graph on the left, what you're seeing is total global primary energy use, all the energy that we use around the world. And you're seeing it by source. So the brown line at the bottom, that's coal. The red band, that's petroleum. Blue is fossil gas, so-called natural gas. In our model, we have wind and solar and geothermal and hydro and other renewables, all represented separately because they have different rates of technological progress and costs and supply curves, but they're all producing essentially zero carbon energy. And so we add them together in the green wedge of renewables. Likewise, we have 3 ways to make bioenergy from wood, from wastes and crop residues. That's this band, and then nuclear power on top. I'm not going to go into it much, but we've got the model starts here at 2000. So we have the opportunity to compare it to historical data. And 2 quick examples. This shows the data from 1990 and the model for the marginal cost of solar photovoltaics. And as you all know, they've come down in cost dramatically and are now the cheapest way to make electricity, often with storage. And the model tracks that extremely closely. Just one more example. Here's how the model tracks the average global temperature. And you can see the warming trend. We're up about 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial now. So there are literally dozens more examples of that you can look at to see how we compare against history across the economy, the energy system, the climate, and also how we compare against other models. But I'll let you explore those on your own for right now. So in our base case, energy demand grows. Why? Because there's population growth. We're using the UN's medium fertility population projection. Here you see it by region, most of the growth happening in the developing world. Here's India, which is projected to peak in the next decade or so and then gently decline through declining fertility. China has already peaked, that's right here. And the developing countries are much smaller and down here. Now, there's uncertainty. If you don't like these assumptions, you can change them. So if I grab this slider and move it, we have higher or lower population, and the model instantly resimulates to show you the outcome for population, the economy, energy use, greenhouse emissions, and climate change. I'm going to leave it at the base case, though. And we have similar assumptions about future economic growth. I'm going to leave it at the base case. And energy efficiency, which you can see here. the amount of energy you need to produce a real dollar or rupee or euro or renminbi of economic output has been falling. Technological progress, some climate action, and we're projecting that that progress will continue. But even so, the consequence is growth in energy demand around the world, especially as the developing countries continue to emerge into the global middle class and become affluent. And you can see here, although the renewables are growing very rapidly, not fast enough to displace the fossil fuels, the coal, oil, and gas. And what that means is greenhouse gas emissions that you see over here continue to grow modestly and then stabilize at high levels. So the gray band here, that's the carbon dioxide that's coming from burning the coal, oil, and gas over here. And that is by far the biggest contributor to climate change. The second biggest is that light blue band, that's methane. Methane is a very powerful greenhouse gas. It's the second biggest contributor. Most of it's coming from leakage of methane, natural gas from the energy system, from industry, and from agriculture. The third biggest contributor today is here, the green band. This is carbon dioxide from land degradation and deforestation. And then we have here nitrous oxide, which is primarily the result of fertilizer, synthetic fertilizer use, and some industrial applications. And then the yellow band are the fluorinated gases, sulfur hexafluoride, CFCs, HCFCs, PFCs, et cetera. So altogether, greenhouse gases continue to grow, but then stabilize. And the consequence of that is a steady rise in global warming. So here we are right around 1.5 today. In our base case, we breached the 2-degree threshold, the upper limit from the Paris Agreement, right around mid-century, and it keeps going up and would keep going up beyond 2100 with 3.3 C of warming above pre-industrial levels. That's 6 Fahrenheit above pre-industrial by 2100. Now, what would the consequences of that be? Well, it would be nothing short of catastrophe, and I use that word very deliberately. The official scientific language from the IPCC is anything in the high 2s and over 3 degrees would lead to, and I'm quoting, severe and irreversible consequences with limited ability to adapt. Well, you know, if you went to your doctor and said, Doc, I don't feel good, I'm feverish all the time, my energy is low, I can't think straight, Doc says, let's do the tests. Tests come back and the doctor comes back to you and says, you know, I'm really sorry, but you have a condition that's causing severe and irreversible harms to you, and there's almost nothing we can do. I think you would consider that a catastrophic diagnosis. So what are some of the impacts of this? Well, we keep track of a wide range of impacts, and we're adding more all the time. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but for example, air pollution from energy is already high. This is PM 2.5. Those of you who are from South Asia or Shanghai, China, or Houston, LA, you know this is a big problem in those countries and regions. World Health Organization indicates that 7 to 8 million people every year are dying prematurely from this air pollution, most of which comes from burning fossil fuels, and that's expected to get worse. Crop yields are expected to fall significantly. These are the big 4 grains that feed almost everybody on Earth, directly or through livestock. And you're looking at double-digit drops in corn and wheat yields and almost 10% for rice and soy. And this is in a world where the UN tells us we need to be able to feed 2 million more people by 2100. Other impacts that we're keeping track of, there's more than we can spend time on now, but let's look at sea level rise. Sea level rise expected to be about 70 centimeters by 2100. It's very likely to be more. Every year those estimates go up. So what are the impacts of that? Well, we can look anywhere in the world and see what the impacts on the coastal areas would be. Here's the Gulf Coast of the United States. This is 2050, not 2100, just 25 years from now. And you can see the devastation here in an economically important center for oil and gas, for many other industries, for the military, for communications, and so forth. And of course, it's worse than that because we get big hurricanes in the Gulf Coast. We had a number of them just this past hurricane season. A typical storm surge in a big hurricane in the Gulf might be 4 meters. So let's see what that would do on top of 1 meter of the 2050 sea level rise. And this would be absolutely devastating. You can look anywhere in the world for that. I'm just going to show you one more. This is Shanghai with 2050 sea level rise and a 2 meter only typhoon, and obviously catastrophic. So the challenge for us, and there are many other impacts here, is how do we bend that emissions curve? Before I do that, though, there's one other impact that's of great importance, and that is what do all these harms do to our economy? So let's take a look at that. This is real gross world product per capita, GDP per capita averaged over the world. It's been growing, and the dashed line is what it would be if climate change had no further impact on the economy, something we know is false. The solid line is the actual growth path given the warming and the various damages. Now, the literature here is uncertain and it's evolving quickly. We're using a study that's a few years old, generally considered to be a good one, but honestly, it's over-optimistic. Nevertheless, you can see a huge decline in economic growth as a result of warming. Now, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, the economy is still growing. What's the big deal? You see this little drop right there? That little blip there? That's the economic harm from COVID. What's coming at us from climate change, even if this over-optimistic study is correct, makes COVID look like an insignificant blip. So there's a lot more we could look at, but now here's what I want to do. Down here, you've got a wide range of policy actions and actions business can take to reduce emissions and bend that curve down and limit the warming to no more than 2 degrees, well below 2 degrees, as the Paris Agreement suggests, requires. So what should we try first? Well, I've already seen lots and lots of suggestions here, but one of the most popular ones that I saw here was pricing carbon emissions. That came out early and often in the chat. So we can do that. Let's take a look. And while you're thinking about what else you might want to suggest over here, you could disincentivize, tax, regulate, phase out coal or oil or gas. You could incentivize and encourage bioenergy or go the other way. You could incentivize renewables or look at a scenario where support for renewables erodes, as it is today in the United States. You could subsidize or discourage nuclear. This new zero carbon says, what if we had fusion power or some other radical breakthrough that could produce 100% zero carbon electricity? And then over here, you can work on energy efficiency in the end use sectors, transportation, the built environment, industry, and you can electrify end uses. You can change the population and economic growth assumptions. And over here, we have different carbon dioxide removal technologies, nature-based like afforestation or climate-friendly agriculture, technological carbon dioxide removal like direct air capture. We could cut emissions from agriculture and waste and leakage of the methane, the nitrous oxide, and the fluorinated gases over here. And you could cut back on deforestation. So let's see what people are suggesting here. Carbon price came out early and often. And okay, well, Atul, you just suggested 100% nuclear. Atul, let's unmute Atul and really quickly, very, very fast, Atul. What do you think the impact of massive subsidies for nuclear power would be? You there, Atul? Did we unmute him?
He's unmuted.
Atul? Can you tell us why you think, or what do you think the impact of big subsidies for nuclear is going to be? Okay, well, let's try it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to heavily, heavily subsidize nuclear power. loan guarantees, low interest financing, indemnification from risks and cost of waste disposal, security, all of those issues. And right now we're at 3.31 degrees of warming by 2100. And let's just massively subsidize nuclear. So so 1/10 of a degree, basically, 1/10 of a degree of impact, not much. So how come? Well, the first question is, do we in fact get more nuclear? So let's go here to the advanced settings. And yes, we do. The base case nuclear limps along. And with significant government subsidies around the world, it grows dramatically, 6 times more, actually more like 9 times more than in the base case. However, it doesn't make much difference to the climate. Well, how come? That doesn't make sense. First thing is, it takes a really long time to grow that capacity, and that nuclear power plants take a very long time to build. And in the meantime, we're still burning the coal and gas that are generating a lot of the electricity today. So that's a problem. This is called the time value of carbon. It's much more valuable as a climate solution to cut a ton of emissions today than to take that same ton out in 2030, 40, 50, or beyond. Because every day that carbon you're burning today is in the atmosphere, it continues to warm the climate for upwards of a century. And that's not happening quickly with nuclear power. The other thing that's happening is, take a look at the energy mix here. So I'm going to roll it back. This is what's happening after mid-century. And when we have this dramatic growth in nuclear, what happens? Well, there's less coal, less fossil fuel, less gas and coal in particular. But what else happens? Look at the band of the renewables here. No subsidies, subsidies. The renewables also get cut back. This is pretty straightforward. Utilities will build nuclear if it's cheaper than alternatives. But if it is, they won't build as many coal plants or gas plants, and that's good. But they also won't build as many industrial and utility scale solar and wind farms. And so there's a self-cannibalization here of other zero carbon, low carbon sources of energy, and that accounts for the low impact. It's also quite expensive. Now, that doesn't mean you don't want it in your energy mix. Let's keep moderate subsidies in here, and we're down just a little bit. So what else could make a really big difference? Well, in the chat at the beginning, many people suggested carbon prices. So let's try that. Anybody have an idea of how big of a carbon price you think would be plausible and effective? Drop your ideas in the chat or raise your hand. $150 per ton, says Hugh. Okay, well, let's try that. $200 a ton. Okay, well, let's start with something a little more modest. So right now, today, there are carbon prices in the world, but most countries don't have them. Prices on average are too low, and many countries are still subsidizing their fossils. So we estimate that the average carbon price globally is only about $5 a ton, which is negligible. That wouldn't even be 1 cent on a gallon of gasoline in the United States. So let's try this in steps. Let's try $100 a ton first. Now, $100 a ton, that's about 89 cents on a gallon of gasoline in the United States. So divide that by 4 roughly to get how many euro cents per liter. It's not that much. We're at 3.28. And if we implement that, wow, that has a big impact all the way down to 2.7 degrees. Now I'm phasing it in over 10 years. You can change all these assumptions, but 10 years would give companies and consumers, individuals, time to adapt and prepare. Why does it have such a big impact? Why does it have such a big impact? And you know, any of you who have had me in the classroom, you know that I call on people. So let's see if this can work. Let's see. David Rubin. Can we unmute David? And if you're there, David, why does the carbon price have such a big impact?
Again, the question is adjusting it or
No,
make
no.
it
So $100 a ton, which is not that much bigger than the current European trading system price. A little bit bigger, but not much. Why does it have such a dramatic impact? We went from 3.3 to 2.7, 0.6 degrees of reduction with this one policy. Why does it do so well?
I think it incentivizes a generator of CO2 to change other sources of electricity.
Absolutely, right? Look at how coal, which is the most carbon intensive fuel, is dramatically reduced. Also petroleum, also fossil gas, and renewables are stimulated, and nuclear is stimulated even more than it was with just the nuclear subsidies. So absolutely right. Thank you, David. And then the other thing that's going on is you'll notice total energy demand falls. That's because higher prices in the near term due to the continued dependence on fossil creates incentives for investments in efficiency throughout the economy. And you can see that here. Energy needed per dollar of real GDP is falling well below the path it was on in the base case. So everybody has an incentive to become more efficient as well. So you're flipping the way we get our energy, and efficiency is being promoted. Fantastic. Now we're still at 2.7. We got a long way to go to get well below 2 degrees. What other ideas do people have? So I need to hear ideas in the chat or in the questions. Raise your hand. What else should we try here that might have high leverage? Okay, Randall says CDR, carbon dioxide removal, is the only answer. I'm also seeing methane and DAC, insulation in homes, so more energy efficiency. Let's fiddle with the middle and right columns. Okay, great. Well, we can try a bunch of things. Let's start with energy efficiency. Now, energy efficiency is already being accelerated by the carbon price, but there are other barriers to efficiency improvements beyond just the price of carbon. One very important one in the built environment, housing in particular, is the owner-tenant problem. So anybody who rents an apartment, at least in many places, probably pays the energy costs, the utility costs themselves. That means that the building owner is not incentivized to spend their money to upgrade the energy system, put in heat pumps, insulation, give you a better refrigerator, et cetera, because you would get the benefits as the tenant who's going to have lower energy bills, but the owner would pay the costs. That's a solvable problem, and lots of countries and states have policies to do this, including Massachusetts. So let's simulate what that would do. We're at 2.72. Let's have a significant energy efficiency program. And over and above the $100 a ton carbon price, that gets us down to 2.55. That's a big, big drop. And remember, every 1/10 of a degree matters here. Every 1/10 of a degree is reducing the harms. And we can do the same in transportation. 2.47, fantastic. Coming over here, a lot of comments about carbon dioxide removal. Let's start with nature-based solutions. So one of the important nature-based solutions is afforestation. There's a big debate, and I've been studying this quite a bit, about how much land could be planted in trees that could help remove carbon from the atmosphere. I'm going to take the most optimistic estimate that's out in the literature and just really ramp it up all the way. And I'll note that this purple band here, this is bioenergy with carbon capture and sequestration, and the $100 a ton carbon price is getting us a little bit of that. But here's the impact from planting all those trees. Think of this as the Trillion Tree Campaign. We're sequestering every year 5 billion tons, 5 gigatons of carbon in those trees. But it takes a long time for those trees to grow. You have to acquire the land, you have to plant the trees, but it's especially a long time for them to grow. So what's the impact? It's not nothing, but it's about a 1/10 of a degree. So every 1/10 matters, but this is not a magic bullet, a silver bullet for climate change. We can add some agricultural carbon dioxide removal. This would happen through no-till and low-till agriculture, soil amendments using manure instead of synthetic fertilizers. Again, we can sequester another few gigatons of carbon. Now we're down to 2.35, so that helps. Other thoughts, other thoughts. Oh, let's see. Well, methane. I see people are pointing to methane. Methane, you can see here, the carbon dioxide wedge is shrinking dramatically, not to zero, but you see it falling. You'll also see here the deforestation, the land degradation, the green band is falling compared to the base case. We haven't actually implemented a policy for deforestation reduction. Here's our assumption. Our assumption is in the base case, deforestation will gradually be reduced, but it takes the rest of the century. It's happening faster in the scenario that you are building than in the base case, even though we haven't actually implemented a policy. Why is that happening? Well, one reason is we're now down to 2.3 degrees of warming. And one of the things that that does for us is if we go back here, it means that crop yields aren't going to fall as much as they would otherwise. Now, they're still going to be lower, but that's a significant drop from 19 to 12%, 16 to just under 10 for corn and wheat, and similar for rice and soy. That means we don't have to clear as many tropical forests in the Indian subcontinent, in South Asia, Southeast Asia, the Congo, and in the Amazon in order to grow the food that we need for a growing population. So that helps reduce deforestation, even though we don't have stronger policies to do so. That's pretty interesting. But we could cut deforestation further. And now we're at a little under 2.3. And you can see here, now we actually have slight negative emissions coming from the land sector. The trees that are growing through afforestation and then reduced deforestation. Fantastic. We're making progress. What else? What else can we do to get under 2, well below 2? Well, look, time is short, and there's a few other things I want to talk about. Let me just say that when we do this with senior political leaders, with senior leaders in business, I'm talking C-suite, CEOs, boards of directors, and other executives, we always ask for a lot longer than we have today. And the reason for that is people have to learn for themselves. And so there has to be enough time for people to really dig in here. So we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And to make sure we have some time for discussion, I'm going to pull a couple other levers. Most of these have been already suggested in the chat up above. And unfortunately, we won't have time in this session to do all of your suggestions, but because the model is freely available after this session, please continue to explore on your own. So we can also reduce emissions from agriculture. That helps quite a bit. We're now at 2.2. We can cut emissions of the methane, the N2O, and the fluorinated gases. You'll notice that they're already down compared to the base case. That's because with less fossil energy, there's less methane leakage from the energy supply chain. With the agricultural and other policies we've put into place, energy efficiency, there's less methane coming from agriculture. Also, N2O and the fluorinated gases are down. But we could do better with focused policies. So let's cut that, not to the maximum of what engineering estimates suggest is possible, but 2/3 of that, which I think is technically possible and affordable. And now we're at about 2. So that all helps terrifically. What else might matter? Well, there's still some coal in the system. Coal is abundant and cheap and subsidized in many parts of the world. We could phase that down, phase it out. One way to do that would be no new investment in coal infrastructure after this year, say. You choose the year. And we could buy out or regulate, shut down some of the existing coal plants. And that helps a little bit. Most of the coal is gone already, but that helps. You could do the same for oil and natural gas. Nobody has suggested, I don't think, what to do with bioenergy. Most countries are aggressively subsidizing bioenergy. After all, especially wood bioenergy. The reasoning is it's got to be better to use trees, wood, to generate electric power and heat than fossil fuels because the trees can grow back. I've studied this intensively. Let's find out what the impact is. There is, of course, bioenergy in the base case. You can see it here. But let's heavily subsidize bio. And we are getting more. And then it falls away because of the overall decline in, let's see, here's what's happening. In our scenario, bioenergy declines without the subsidies. If we have the subsidies, climate change actually gets a little worse. We were under 2 and now we're over 2 again. The reasons for this are when you count the combustion efficiency and supply chain emissions for wood bioenergy, it actually puts more CO2 into the air per kilowatt hour you generate than even coal, and far more than gas, and infinitely more than wind and solar. And you're displacing some of those when you subsidize bioenergy. So it would be better to reduce bioenergy from wood even more. All right, so now where are we? We're a little bit under 2. We can do even better. What about electrification of end uses? Well, in the base case, there is some electrification and it's accelerated somewhat. And if we accelerate that with transportation and in the built environment, now we're under 2 degrees, 1.9. I would also notice really quickly that if we go to the base case and we just electrify without doing anything else, the impact is very, very small. And the reason is, look what's happening. Let me go back a little bit. Here's the base case. Now we heavily electrify transport. So what's happening is we're not using petrol as much in our vehicles, but we have to charge all those batteries. Without decarbonizing the electric power system, you're getting more coal and more gas. So oil goes down, but the other fossils go up. So there's an important complementarity here. Electrification is low leverage unless we are simultaneously decarbonizing the grid as fast as we can. You're substituting power plant emissions for tailpipe emissions. Well, here we are below 2 degrees. If we add a little technological carbon dioxide removal, which is pretty speculative, but there are experiments and some pilot plants going on with direct air capture, with enhanced mineralization. There's some marine CDR ideas, but nothing implemented at scale. Here we are at about 1.8 degrees. You can probably do better, and I'd invite you to come up with your own scenario. But let's take the remaining 15 minutes to get your thoughts, your questions, and then I have a couple last things to show you about how this model is being used here at MIT and in education around the world. So, challenges, questions, there's so much in the chat. It's wonderful. And Moana and Noreen, who are here from the Alumni Association, I hope we can capture everything that's been posted in the Q&A and in the chat and make that available to people, because there are some fantastic ideas there. But let's hear from you all.
So John, one thing I noticed is what are your insights? What would you do if you're a policy?
So, you know, GK, I'm asked that all the time, and I'll tell you a story. We've briefed many people in the U.S. Congress. I think 35. I personally briefed 35, 36 U.S. senators, 200 members of the House, including people from both parties. And in must have been 2019, we briefed now former Senator Mitt Romney of Utah, who has very smart guy. And the first thing he did was he said, well, let's heavily subsidize nuclear. And as you saw, it doesn't make much difference. We went through and we asked him, why do you think that's happening? We went through it. And then he said, great, I understand your model. And he's a very smart guy. Now, tell me what we should do to solve the climate crisis. And my response was, no, sir, that's not how it works. First of all, whose values are we maximizing here? That's not my job. Are we trying to maximize the welfare of the citizens of Utah or the United States? What about other countries? What about India? What about China? What about Africa? That's a difficult question of values, not my job to solve. And the second thing I said is, if I told you my personal view and you disagree with it, you're going to have plenty of reasons to cross your arms and say, well, I don't believe your model. I don't trust your model. The only way this can have any impact is if people have the chance to explore these ideas on their own. So what would you like to try next, sir? And that's what we did. And the meeting went on for substantially longer than was scheduled because, when people have a chance to explore and learn for themselves, that's when they really have a chance to get into it and learn. And nobody's telling them what to do.
One of the other things I saw in the chat, John, is, you suggest pull various levers, you get various outcomes, but what impact does it have on GDP or GDP growth? I mean, can this visual presentation also provide some idea about GDP growth and how it impacts it?
Wonderful. Thank you for bringing that up. I forgot to show it to everybody. But so first of all, we do, and there were questions in the chat about, what does all of this cost? So one of the things we do is we keep track of all the costs of the policies as best we can. So here you see the revenue and the expenses from the different subsidies. But the model's not intended to be a global macroeconomic model with monetary and fiscal policy and endogenous tax rates, but this gives you some idea about costs. The thing about the costs is what is expensive and what is cheap depends on how broadly you construe the boundary. So a lot of people say, well, energy efficiency, it's pretty expensive to insulate a building, to put in better quality windows, as we've done here in the Sloan building. And so it's not worth it. But that turns out not to be true if you use integrated design. Very quickly, this building that I'm in, E62, the Sloan building, was a new building in 2010. We moved in 2010. I was co-chair of the building committee along with other faculty and senior staff here. And my role was not only to help design the best building for the folks who live and work here, but to make it as sustainable as possible. And we had the strong support of our dean at the time, Dick Schmalensee, who's an energy economist. Even though all the design decisions were made 20 years ago and you could do much better today, this building uses 70% less energy for heating and cooling than the conventional building we could have legally built. And we did a post audit of what all that cost. I don't have time to go into the details, but email me if you want them. And the bottom line was the net present value of what we did here, the additional upfront costs compared to the energy savings, was positive over $9 million. So the sustainability energy efficiency features we put into this building were profitable, and we made a lot of money for MIT. And the payback time was significantly less than a year. So, and that's typical. And today you can do much, much better. Energy efficiency is the fastest, safest, and cheapest way to give people what they really want and need. You all have to remember, nobody wants a ton of coal or a barrel of oil or a cubic meter of natural gas. What people want and need around the world is to be warm in the winter, cool in the summer, have light when they need light, and have access to good, decent, safe jobs, healthcare, education, cultural, and other opportunities. Those are the basic human needs that we try to meet. And in the scenario that you've built here, that's what's happening, largely because energy efficiency is dramatically reducing energy demand while still giving people what they need. Nobody's freezing in the dark here in the scenario you've built. Now, what about the economy? Well, I showed you before what happens to GDP and how the climate damage reduces economic growth. How are we doing now? Actually, economic growth is significantly enhanced, accelerated because of this scenario. And the reason for that is, sure, it costs something to do these things, but the benefits in terms of reduced harms are significant. So deaths from extreme heat are dramatically reduced and labor productivity goes up. Air pollution dramatically down. This saves lives, it boosts labor productivity, it improves the performance of kids in school and then later in life. Crop yield, as I already showed you, is still going to be lower as a result of the warming, but not as much, and on and on and on. All of these harms are greatly reduced. A lot of people, when they ask the question or they say it's too expensive to solve this problem, they're not thinking of the benefits. They're just thinking of the short-run costs.
John, let me make one announcement for everyone's benefit that, as you know, we are recording this session, this conversation. We will process it and place it on the MIT South Asian Alumni Association website, as also the MIT Sloan Alumni New York website, and we will let you know once it is there and you can access this conversation. Thank you. John, I don't want to take, what would you tell a skeptic? There was one person in the chat and he said, well, you're overstating this. This happened in medieval period. This cyclicality exists. You know, I've heard this argument. You heard this argument.
Yeah.
What's
so this is something we don't have time to go into, but the evidence is very clear. Sure, there are natural variations in the climate, but there's no question that the amount and rate of increase in the greenhouse gases is without precedent in human history and indeed for millions of years. So yes, there are those natural variations, but we're in a human-caused crisis here. And it's yes, and there are natural variations, and what we are doing to inject right now about 60 billion tons of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere every year in the base case where we are today, unprecedented and unquestionably causing these harms. Now, the more important question is, can we do this, right? So here's a scenario that we built together, albeit very quickly, that is significantly safer than the pathway we're on. Safer, healthier, better for every country's national security, better for the economy. The question is, yeah, it's easy to move these sliders when you're working with the simulation. Can we do it in the real world? So there's already a lot of reasons for hope here. Now, I'm asked all the time, are you optimistic? I was asked this morning in my class, am I optimistic about whether we can do this? And my answer is simple. I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist. Optimists proclaim this is the best of all possible worlds. And pessimists say, that's right. I don't think we live in the best of all possible worlds. I think what we do can matter. And so what I believe, what I feel is I am hopeful. Now, what hope means for me is not that there's going to be some magical technological breakthrough that's going to magically solve this problem. I don't think that's in the cards, and it probably would come too little too late because for example, fusion power, it's always been 20 years away. Maybe we can come up with practical, affordable fusion power, but it'll take time to scale it and so forth. So try that when you play with the simulation yourself and see if it matters. Now, for me, hope is the idea that it's not too late, even though time is very short, and that what we do individually and collectively still can make a big difference. But that'll only happen if people get active. So what I would ask all of you is to check out the model. As I said, it's freely available. It's available in these 21 languages. Bring it to your organizations, bring it to your faith community, bring it to your friends and your colleagues. share it with your kids, and bring it into education. So let me show you a couple of examples here. We have been using this for years here at the Sloan School, not just with policymakers and business leaders. Here's an example. We have run it as a role play simulation of the global climate negotiations with our MBA students. This is from 2023. We also did it this year, and we're going to do it for all incoming first-year MBAs this August. And they play the roles of different stakeholders: the fossil fuel industry, different leading countries in the world, the renewable industry, the climate activists. And they actually have to negotiate face-to-face and come up with proposals, which we then test live in the simulation. People learn a lot. And as you can see here, the En-ROADS experience scored 91 in the Net Promoter Score survey compared to 32 for the average of all the other leadership and ethics workshops they did that week as well. Now, 32 isn't terrible, but 91 is, and it's because people are learning for themselves. Last August, we ran it for the incoming undergraduate class of 2028. Sally Kornbluth came and introduced it, and there's a lot of them. We had to do it twice. There's no way to do it all at once. And what they did was they worked in small groups with the simulation, MIT kids being super smart, and they picked it up like this, and they came up with their own better than 2-degree scenarios. And then we talked about plausibility. One last thing in the last couple of minutes here. One of our colleagues and teammates, who's at Juliet Rooney Varga at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, she went to the public high school in Cambridge, Cambridge Rindge and Latin, which is where Ben Affleck and Matt Damon went to high school. And she ran a little experiment. The first experiment, or the control condition, was she gave a lecture about climate change, typical of the curricula on climate change you see in a lot of the recommended earth science and other curricular materials. And well, let me just show you what happened. So you don't really need to hear what she's saying. The question is, just look at this. Is anybody learning anything? And the answer is plainly no. Lectures don't work. So then the treatment group was, they played that role play simulation like the MBA students did. They're representing different countries and stakeholders in the world. And what they come up with for proposals, we then try out in the model and iterate until they reach a scenario that they can't improve on. Well, take a look at this. Young man in the red hoodie is playing the President of the United States. He's not willing to put a lot of money in to help the developing world, Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, make progress. They're pushing on him hard. He's not having much of it, but just take a look at the energy difference here. It goes on for a little while. Take a look at the difference in the energy. There's so much learning going on here. And they're not just learning about the climate and politics and the geopolitical situation. They're learning public speaking. They're learning negotiation. They're learning a lot about themselves. This is the kind of thing that comes from this kind of work. Our next steps, the model is free. I'll make sure through GK that you get the link to it. But we have some ambitious goals here. We've got right now over 850 folks, volunteers from all over the world, 87 nations, including Southeast Asia, Africa, everywhere, who are climate ambassadors with En-ROADS. They've been through our free training and are now able to run workshops with the simulation themselves. We want to grow that. We want to reach 100,000 leaders, not just the 18,000, 19,000 we've reached so far. We want to reach 8 million folks in the public. That's 0.1% of the global population. And we want to build climate pathway projects in other key emitting nations, including we're working now with some folks from India to see if we can bring that about, because India is the 3rd largest emitter, bigger than the European Union as a whole. And its emissions are unfortunately growing very quickly. So there's a lot riding on whether we can do this, not just in Europe, not just in the United States, but all over the world. You can help. You can bring the model to your colleagues. You can tell us how you think it can be improved. You can share it with everybody. You can help financially, but get out there, use it, give us some feedback, and I'll make sure that these slides and follow-up information are made available to all of you. Thank you all so much for your participation today. GK, any final words?
No, just thank you. A big thank you to you for making time for all of us. And I'm telling our friends that we will have the recording, and then when the recording is ready, we will let them know that it is on these web portals and they can access them. And along with that information, we'll also send other information such as your slides and all that. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, John. You're always so gracious.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. So much to learn. Thank you. My regards to you. So long. Have a great afternoon, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. Thank you, John. You have a great afternoon.
Thank you, John. Stay warm.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.